Well, before his broadcast, President Bola Tinubu held an emergency meeting with top security chiefs and National Assembly leaders at the State House. The closed-door meeting, which lasted several hours, ended without any statement or briefing to the press. In attendance were the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, National Security Advisor Nuhu Ribadu, security chiefs, the Inspector General of Police, and the heads of the State Security Service, as well as the National Intelligence Agency. Now, what are the criteria for declaring a state of emergency?
Well, in the Nigerian Constitution, a state of emergency can be declared when, 1, Nigeria is at war, when the country is in imminent danger of invasion or involvement in a state of war, when there is a breakdown of public order and public safety in any part of the country, when it's clear that there is a present danger, clear and present danger, an actual breakdown of public order and public safety, when there is an occurrence or imminent danger of the occurrence of any disaster or natural calamity, when there is any danger which clearly constitutes a threat to the existence of Nigeria, and when the president receives a request to declare a state of emergency from a state governor. The president can also make the decision in a situation in which the governor of the state fails within a reasonable time to make a request. The proclamation must be ratified by 2/3 of the members of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Well, we're joined now by Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Oba Maduabuchi, and Arise analyst Mahmoud Jega. Thank you, both of you, gentlemen, for joining us on Newsnight. It's been a whirlwind kind of day. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, let me start with you. I mean, so much has been, Nigerians are asking so many questions, and we're wondering exactly where we can begin to unpack this. Number one, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, did you see this coming, based on the events that have led to this? And which part of the Nigerian Constitution empowers the president to declare a state of emergency on the one hand and to remove the governor on the other hand?
Well, thank you, Ngozi. It's always a pleasure being here. I wouldn't say that we didn't see it coming, because both parties went back to the trenches. Nobody was ready to give an inch. The governor was not ready to give an inch. The House of Assembly was not ready to give an inch. And even when you hear what some of the leaders were saying, you know that nobody was ready to compromise. Yes. So I think the president did the only thing that he ought to have done. But if you ask me, the president should have declared a state of emergency. Because it's not beyond him to call Amwehule, Fubara, and Wike into one room and say, please go and sort this thing out. My friend do this, my friend do that, my friend do that. And all this question of state of emergency wouldn't have arisen. Because state of emergency is an aberration. It is provided for by the Constitution, but it's still unconstitutional. Because in the first place, it suspends democratic structures that make it possible for you to participate in governance. The moment you remove the assembly, you move into a dictatorship. And now we have returned to military rule. Ibo Keita was, yes, Abbas. He was a military chief of Naval Staff or something. So, and that is where we are. It was we saw it coming because the parties wouldn't.
But clearly, I need you to state, for us, this section 305 and paragraph 5, which the president relied on. The question I asked you earlier, this section, does it clearly state that the president can remove the governor in the event of a state of emergency being declared?
Yes. The governor, once a state of emergency is declared, the rule of law gives way. It now becomes the rule of what pleases the president. And one of them is he has the ability to remove the governor, dissolve the suspend the National Assembly for 6 months. Yes, he has that. But then, it does not take effect unless the 2 National Assembly houses approve it. It is not at the whims of the president. When he does that, he has to submit it to the, one, it has to be published in the Gazette, then it must be submitted to the state, to the Senate and the House of Reps for them to pass it. Within 2 days when they are in session, within 10 days when they are not in session.
Yeah, great. Let's bring in Arise News analyst Mahmoud Jega into this conversation. I guess I will also ask you, did you see this coming? We've been discussing Rivers for quite a bit. And even in his response, the senior advocate of Nigeria here had mentioned an employee of the president, Minister Wike of the FCT. When you listen to the president speak today, what did you make of his language, calling the governor a despot? And also people have raised questions about his employee, the minister of the FCT, missing in that entire speech. What did you make of that?
Okay, thank you very much. I was listening to what the son said. I'm not a lawyer and he is a whole son. But if we recall the events of the last 20 years, I beg to disagree with what he said. And let me cite the instance of what happened in 2007 when Atiku Abubakar, who was the then vice president, defected from PDP to AC, and the Obasanjo presidency declared the vice presidency as vacant. And Atiku Abubakar went to court. And the Supreme Court delivered a judgment, I think, in 2008, when the tenure had even elapsed. And what the Supreme Court stated is that an executive officer, such as president, vice president, governor, or deputy governor, can only lose his position before the expiration of his tenure in one of 4 ways expressly stated in the Constitution, which are resignation, impeachment, incapacitation, and death. And the Supreme Court said that you cannot add to the Constitution anything that it did not expressly state. So whether defection to another party, and similarly, declaration of state of emergency was not mentioned as one of the conditions in the Constitution in which an executive officer can lose his position. I therefore hope that the president was well advised by the Attorney General, because this matter is likely to very soon go back to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court is consistent with its pronunciation in 2008, it is likely to declare that the president has no power to remove a governor or deputy governor and state assembly. And beyond that, in 2013, when President Jonathan wanted to declare a state of emergency in 3 northeastern states of Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa because of the Boko Haram problem, he called a meeting of legislative leaders and told them that he's going to declare this state of emergency and he was going to remove the 3 governors. The Speaker of the House of Representatives at the time, Amin Waziri Tambuwal, who is a lawyer, stated clearly that no, Mr. President, based on this ruling of the Supreme Court, you have no power to remove the governors and state assemblies of those states. President Obasanjo did it in Plateau in 2004, but it was because Governor Darie did not go to court. So that was how that matter was led to lie. And President Jonathan accepted that advice, and he declared a state of emergency in the 3 northeastern states in 2013, but he did not remove their democratic structures. Instead, the security agencies, military and others came into the states in huge numbers and aided the civilian authority in trying to combat Boko Haram. That is why I am suspecting the legality of the declaration today. But as I said, I am not a lawyer, and very soon we will hear.
Senior Advocate of Nigeria, I'm sure you want to respond to, the point he made there. And in the same breath, I'd like you to, respond to this. Nigeria actually ratified the Syracuse Principles that any emergency declaration must be in good faith. Would you say that this declaration really is in good faith? Are there other underlying factors that could have played out? Because when you listen to the president, just like Adesua said, it looked like a one-sided chastisement, if you like, where the president acknowledged there are two parties involved in the crisis in Rivers State, or there are parties involved. But he mentioned the governor and never said anything about the other parties.
Well, you see, I will speak here like a lawyer.
Yes, please.
I will leave the politicians to talk their politics.
Great.
And there are things you can tell somebody. A blind man that there's no oil. You cannot tell a blind man there's no salt in his soup. Once he puts it in his mouth, he will know whether there is. So I won't go further than that. But like it is being said, when you say that this person did this, he did this, he was supposed to do this, he refused to do this, and the impression he creates is very, very wrong, in my opinion. And I think the president should have been more presidential. Whoever wrote that speech did not do the president any favors at all, because the impression is the person that usually wins has won again. So.
Mahmoud Jega raised a fundamental question, which is one of my questions.
Yes.
We've seen past presidents declare state of emergencies differently. In the case of President Olusegun Obasanjo, he removed the governors. In the case of President Jonathan in 2013, right before the election, he left the governors in charge, as well as the administrators that came to help. So given this inconsistency, does it not suggest that there's a lack of clarity when it comes to constitutional guidelines of declaring state of emergency in the country? And in other words, should the courts not provide a definitive interpretation of that section 305?
Yes, you see, when we interpret provisions of the Constitution and any statute, we are always looking for the intendment of the legislature. Did the legislature expect or envision a situation where there will be two governors in a state if you declare a state of emergency? Because a state of emergency is a suspension of democracy. And don't forget that Section 305 2D or so says that person that will be running the state will not make any new laws. But if he wants, he can make regulations which must be approved by the FEC. If you have democratic structures, if you have the governor in place, will that person be ruling over the governor too? Which person, who is now the boss, so to say, whose voice reigns, who is said to be in charge? You can't have two governors.
Yes.
So the moment you declare a state of emergency and suspend democratic structures, everything about that is why the judiciary was not touched. Your judiciary is not part of your democracy. We have our own, the way we do our things. I can tell you who will be our next CJ. We don't need to go and do an election on that.
Okay, let me bring in Mahmoud Jega before we wrap this. What do you think the likely implications are? This state of emergency, does it even solve the problem of the crisis in Rivers State? Malam Jega, does it solve the problem? And, some are saying it has to do with 2027. Are you seeing that playing out?
I don't know whether it has to do with 2030 or anything, but the problem at hand, first of all, is that the legality of the declaration and in particular the suspension of the democratic structures has to be clarified. And what I suspect could happen is that some PDP-controlled states are likely to go to the Supreme Court very quickly, because a matter between state governments and federal governments goes straight to the Supreme Court and test the legality of the declaration. And if the Supreme Court is consistent with its 2018 judgment, then it is likely to strike down that part of the declaration which removes constitutional structures. That is what I suspect will happen. As to whether this will solve the problem, I don't think so. You see, as was pointed out, I thought the president could have, just like he enumerated the misdeeds of the governor, should have also said a few things about the minister of the FCT, who is actually very, very central to the creation and perpetuation of this problem. Is it normal in law or in politics that somebody as godfather should sit down in Abuja and begin factionalizing the assembly and causing all kinds of problems in a state that he once governed? And unless something is done about that, then the problem will never be solved, maybe before 2027, the way I see it.
Quite unfortunate. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Maduabuchi, and Arise News analyst Mahmoud Jega.
Yes, very quickly.
In 20 seconds if you can.
Yes, you see, we say the Supreme Court said you cannot, that is in Abubakar and the Federal Republic. Well, I agree, but that is ordinarily. Ordinarily, nobody has, the only way you lose your seat is death, resignation, incapacity, or what. There are four instances. Ordinarily. But ordinary times do not exist in state of emergency.
Right. Okay. Thank you both for being on the news tonight. We do appreciate your time.